Yeah, hello. This is Busby again. I got such such a good response from my Facebook post on the issue of the Russian poisoning of the Skripals that I thought I'd say something on YouTube as well about it, so that I could reach more people, because it's quite an important issue for various reasons that I'll explain. The first thing I need to say about all of this is that I am an expert in this area. If I'm an expert in any area, this is the area I'm an expert in. I worked for several years at the Wellcome Research Laboratories in Beckenham on the physical chemistry of pharmaceutical compounds, or small organic compounds. And my job there, apart from the research aspect, which was to do with how these things work at the molecular level, was to develop and use spectroscopic and other methods to determine the structure of these substances as they were made by the chemists who synthesized these molecules for testing. So I spent a long time figuring out what the molecular structure of these things were, which means I know how it's done. Also, I did my first PhD at Queen Mary College London on a similar project involving synthesizing small organic molecules in order to investigate their properties, their acidity constants and stuff like that. So that's where I'm coming from here. I do happen to know about this stuff. So what I can say is that first of all, that the substance, the A234 substance, which Port and Down tell us they've identified as being the material that poisoned the Skripals, that is not something that you would need to have a state actor to make. I mean, it's just a basic organic chemical synthesis. The only difficulty about it would be its extraordinary toxicity. So you'd need to have a good fume cupboard system and protective equipment so as to not to get it on yourself and kill yourself or one of your technicians, but it's not particularly difficult to make. Any synthetic organic chemist would be able to knock up something like that without a lot of difficulty. So that's the first thing. So it doesn't have to have been made in a fancy laboratory. But the second and more important thing is that the way in which you investigate the structure, you identify the material, is you take a sample. And in this case, probably it wouldn't be an awful lot of it, but nowadays there are all sorts of very sophisticated machines. And what you would do is you would then examine it using gas chromatography and mass spectrometry. It's the mass spectrometry that would give you the molecular iron and the molecular iron fragments as this material disintegrated inside the various methods that they have for breaking molecules up into little bits and then shooting them down a mass spectrometer to measure the actual iron fragment masses. And that spectrum, the spectrum of the mass spectrometer results, would identify the material. But in order to do that, you'd have to have an example of material. You'd have to synthesize the material in order to have a pattern that showed you whether what it was you were looking at was the same thing. So you would have you'd have a lot of bands in the mass spectrum, and you'd look for the same bands. It's effectively a spectrometry issue. But the important thing is you have to have a sample to start off with in order to find the particular material. Now, we used to do a lot of work on this in order to find drugs that had been synthesized in India or in Spain or in various countries, which were the same as the drugs that Wellcome had patented. And the idea was that you could show that those drugs had been synthesized in a particular laboratory or in a particular country, because you would have samples of those that would enable you to find impurities. So it's the impurity fragments inside the spectrum of the material that enable you to identify its source. Now, there is no way, as far as I can tell, or certainly they haven't told us, in which Port and Down could have obtained material from Russia which they could have compared to the material that was found the Skripal's house or on the car or wherever it was they found it, and we hear lots of different stories about where it was found, where it was detected. So the first thing that we have to say is that if they're saying that they know where it came from in Russia, they're lying, because they can't know that. They would not be able to know that unless they had a sample of the material from Russia that they could compare it to. And how could they get such a thing? And today in the Times, I see another, now that the Porton Down has said that they can't identify the material as having come from Russia. Of course, there's a lot of egg on face all over the place to Boris Johnson and that stupid woman Theresa May. And they're now saying that they have this evidence, which they have to keep secret, of course, that it came from some facility in Russia. But then the question is, how on earth did they get a sample from that facility in Russia? It's just not. It's not possible. It's not possible. So they're lying as usual. They're just trying to cover their back because they're looking stupid, and they're increasingly stupid. The only thing we do know about it is that this material, the exact same material, was synthesized in the United States chemical warfare depot or site in the United States, and somebody put the fragmentation pattern on the scientific NIST, National Institute of Science and Technology website, although they've since taken it off. So we certainly know that the Americans synthesized it, and it's probably quite reasonable to suppose that Porton Down synthesized it as well. If you want to know my opinion, I believe that this is either material from Porton Down, or it's material from the United States, and this was a false flag operation along the lines of the same sorts of false flag operations that led to the Iraq War. And the Iraq War, you remember, was fought because of the idea of weapons of mass destruction that Saddam Hussein had, but of course he didn't have anything of the sort. So that was also bogus. And the real reason for the attack of Iraq, which we don't need to go into too much here, but it's about it was because Saddam Hussein had decided to stop paying for his, stop asking for dollars for the oil and to sell it in euros. And when Gaddafi decided to do the same thing and set up an Arabic dinar based on gold, he was taken out as well. And then the Syrians decided that they were going to sell oil, not in dollars but in euros, and of course they were invaded too. So what this is all about is the end of the United States empire, the petrodollar empire. Basically, that's it. The Russians have now built the pipelines to China, and they're going to start trading their oil directly with China on the basis of yuan. And China is becoming one of the largest importers of oil now because of its huge expansion, and so they're going to ask the Saudis to start paying in yuan and not in dollars, and so basically the dollar control of trade is going down the toilet rapidly. So of course something has to be done, and what's being done is a war is being engendered, and this is terrifying because the fact is that and this is where my other expertise comes in, that nobody can win such a war if they have even a limited nuclear exchange. If the materials, if the radioactive materials fall all over the place, then that's the end of it. That's the end of it. This is because the risk model that they have, which tells them, the stupid people like Theresa May and Boris Johnson and all those stupid fools, possibly Trump as well, the risk model, the radiation risk model that tells those people that they can survive a nuclear war is wrong by factors of up to 10,000 times. And we've already seen the effects of just the nuclear weapons testing. We now see increases in cancer in people who were the children who were born to the children who were born at the time of the nuclear testing. And very recently I saw another piece of evidence relating to this, that in fact young men are more likely to father Down syndrome children than old men like me. Okay? So the rate that if I were to marry a 30-year-old girl and have a baby, the probability of it being a Down syndrome baby is 5 times less than if I was age 20. Yes? Okay? Imagine that. Anyway, that's enough horror show. But just to make it perfectly clear, and that's why I'm putting this video up, that there's no way in which there's any proof that that material that poisoned the Skripals came from Russia. That's the take-home message. Okay, thank you for listening. Talk to you again.